Today we're going to be talking about Ishi, a man known as the last Yahi Indian in the United States. Ishi was likely to have been born around the 1860s. He spent much of his life in hiding with his family in attempts to avoid the assaults of the predominantly white settlers that were moving into the Yahi territory. The Yahi of the Yana group were thought to have become extinct in the late 1800s due to the California gold rush. After his family died, Ishi lived the majority of his life alone in the wilderness. He wandered out of the wilderness and into a town called Oroville, California, where he then became the common interest for anthropologists. Close to starvation and exhaustion with nowhere to go, in August of 1911, Ishi finally decided to surrender himself to the settlers that had ultimately destroyed his tribe's existence. However, Ishi refused to give out his name without the introduction from someone in his tribe. He was in fear that it could be stolen from him. Instead, anthropologists called him Ishi, which means man in Yahi, the language of his people. Anthropologists and Indian Affairs officials believed there only to be around a dozen surviving Yahi. By the time land surveyors stumbled across them in 1908, only Ishi's mother, sister, and uncle remained. By 1911, after the death of his family, Ishi was the sole survivor. This gave him the famous title of the last wild Indian. The news of an Aboriginal Yahi Indian in Oroville quickly reached headlines as the Yahi tribe was assumed to have been decimated. Upon arrival, Ishi was immediately moved to the Museum of Anthropology. This was an alternative to a reservation in Oklahoma. His intelligence was subject to the control of anthropologists studying him. Their analysis of Ishi determined that he had some intelligence. However, officials were not convinced of his ability to survive alone in the city. California Commissioner of Indian Affairs, Charles E. Kelsey, even stated that he could, no more, in my opinion, subsist to his own resources than a child of 6 years old. In exchange for a free place to live and free medical care, he was put to work as a custodial assistant. He was also put on display for white museum audiences as a demonstration of the last Yahi. Every week, the museum held a showing for Ishi, where he was objectified as a living exhibit. Museum goers were eager to shake Ishi's hand and witness him make bow and arrow sets, arrowheads, and traditional Yahi dwellings. During his time at the museum, many said that Ishi would gladly share his knowledge, although he was hesitant to discuss the loss of his family. In spring of 1914, Ishi returned to his ancestral homeland one last time. He went out on an expedition as a way for anthropologists to record his range of activities, including his hunting and fishing skills. Like many Native Americans entering a foreign society, Ishi faced several recurring illnesses, particularly colds. In the winter of 1915, his illness worsened and developed into tuberculosis. By the time the correct diagnosis was made, Ishi had already passed away at the university on March 25, 1916. Although Ishi's presence at the museum brought ticket sales from 30 per week to more than 3,000 some weeks, it is now shameful to look back on the actions of the museum employees and anthropologists that regulated his life. Throughout his time living at the museum, apparently Ishi felt uncomfortable living amongst human remains of Native American ancestors for research. Before he passed away, he requested for his body to be cremated, as it was a tradition of the Yahi people. Ishi's university doctor did not respect his wishes, however. They completed an autopsy on Ishi's body. After its completion, Ishi's brain was sent to the Smithsonian for further study. It wasn't until many years after his death when Ishi's body was cremated and placed at a cemetery just south of San Francisco. Ishi lived through horrible loss and tragedy, yet he still kindly shared his language skills, stories, and creativity with museum professionals, faculty, students, and visitors. He was a profoundly courteous, generous, and curious individual. Ishi will forever be remembered as an influential educator and the last wild Indian.